Welcome everybody, Bryan here with Anita Goodesign, bringing you another Watch and Stitch. And this month, in the month of June, we've got several projects for you, but today I'm going to be bringing you the project that's going to be using heat and shrink applique. So what we're going to be doing here today is taking a material, and we're going to use a piece of fabric to create a quilt block with that material under it. Once we create that quilt block with some running stitch designs on it, which in this case we're going to be doing a star pattern, free motion star pattern, you'll be able to take that over to your iron, steam it, and that heat and shrink material is going to shrink all of that fabric up and around the actual running stitches, creating a really cool effect that we love to use. What we're then going to do is take that quilt block I just showed you, and we're going to create a flower applique with this heat and shrink quilt block we just made as the focal point. So, to get right into that, if you are just watching this because you wanted to see what this is about, see if it's something you're interested in, then by all means watch it as many times as you want. This tutorial also applies to other Shrinky Applique materials, but I think you're going to love the floral design as well as the others in this one that we have for you today. So if that does interest you, you can buy the entire month of June for Watch and Stitch for only $30 at any point in time. These videos never go away online. They'll always be there. So they'll always be there as your resource. Same thing with previous months. They're all on the website for you. You can buy any previous month of Watch and Stitch you like, and all those videos are right there for you as well. So a lot of handy education. You can sew right along with us. And also just to remind you, if I get a bit ahead of you, which I probably will, that's quite all right, because you'll be able to later on go back and watch this video, pause, do it right with me, etc. So don't forget to like, subscribe, click that notification bell if you want to stay up to date with all of our newest content. Whenever we go live on YouTube, etc., you'll get that notification to however you want, your email, your cell phone, etc. And also comment below. Let us know your experience with heat and shrink material, what you may have used it for, or if this is brand new to you. Let's get engaging in the comments below, because we have someone moderating those comments from Anita Goodesign rather, and they will be able to answer any of the questions that you have. And of course, we're going to give some prizes along the way. So stay tuned, wait for that. But to dive right in, this particular tutorial for Shrinky Applique, whenever you get into our tutorials, and I want to walk you through this first, you're always going to start with a materials list. So that will be in the very beginning. It'll kind of get you organized, show you what you need for basically all the general appliques that are within this. Now, your colors may vary, the amount of fabric you may want to use may vary, but this will get you started so you can plan it out. Going into it, as I just mentioned, first we're going to have to create the quilt block with those free motion stitches, the running stitches, to actually get that Shrinky Applique that we'll use in our second hooping. So first what I'm going to do is just load the design on my machine. The first design for that quilt block base is going to use what we recommend as a no-show mesh cutaway stabilizer. So I've already got that guy hooped. I've got my threads laid out. I've got my notions I need, my scissors, tape, etc. So we'll go ahead and get this loaded in, get it started, and I'm going to give you plenty of tips and tricks while we get this running. All right. So when we get in here, I know a lot of you are going to want to go right ahead and just look at the picture steps, but you already have me on video. So the picture steps are generally for you to refer to when you don't quite understand or don't have the context, because maybe you're newer, as to what we mean in the number steps. So that's what I want you to focus on first and foremost, is the number steps. And the file we are going to be doing first, like I said, is the quilt block. Those free motion quilt blocks to create the Shrinky applique we'll be using will be in the back of the tutorial. You have one that's going to give you a circular pattern and another one that's going to give you a star pattern like the one we're using in class today. The file I'm using is SAP7. The size that you choose to use is totally up to you, whether it's that A size or B size. Those just tell you whatever hoop size you have, you can accommodate it with the size quilt block you want to use. So I'm flipping over to the number steps here, but I'm going to use both the number and the picture steps because that's what I recommend to do at home when you don't have a video. However, since you're able to watch me, it'll make things a bit easier, which is why I know you guys love these videos. So tell us below how much these videos have helped you over the years. So with SAP 7, the file we're getting ready to run, the first step is the squaring stitch. Then we're going to place that shrinky material. So I've got a contrasting thread on here that's basically going to match the top fabric I'm going to be using in the end. It'll make it much easier for you to see with the cameras that we have pointing at the machine. So first things first, go ahead and start that squaring stitch. Now, what is a squaring stitch? Well, if you're not a quilter, then, or if you're new to Anita Goodesign, you might not know that our quilt blocks are a foundation for a lot of different patterns that we have. And our quilting system is done in a way to where the very first step for every quilt block, regardless if it's a square, a rectangle, a scallop edge, etc., starts with a squaring stitch. What this squaring stitch means is everything that goes outside of this stitch throughout the entire design is your seam allowance. So there will be no stitching outside of it, and that just lets us know when and where we need to trim our fabrics, which I'll explain more later on. So first step is done. I ran my squaring stitch. Now, one habit I want you to get into, if you already haven't done this, because this is where I messed up a lot when I first started, is I would read step 1, squaring stitch, then place shrinky material. I would run my squaring stitch, forget that I was supposed to place the shrinky material, and then read step 2 and just tack down nothing. So always go back and reread that previous step, because there may be something to do after the machine step is done. So now that we've run that squaring stitch, I'm going to place that shrinky material in there. At home, if you want, you can just go ahead and lightly secure it with some tape so it doesn't shift on you. And we'll drop it and run that tack down stitch. Now, the squaring stitch is our paint by numbers approach to basically doing anything at Anita. So you won't have to guess where to put something in a hoop. You won't have to wonder how much material you need, because that squaring stitch literally tells you, 1, where to place it. I know that I need to cover the squaring stitch all the way around. And 2, I can use my ruler after I run that squaring stitch to go ahead and measure and prep my fabric. One moment while I get this going again. Now, one thing I see in classes all the time, and I've had no experience in this field before I started as an educator at Anita Goodesign almost 8 years ago, but one thing I notice in class all the time is that, for instance, my thread just came undone. So a lot of people assume you have to back up and do it again, but I know that this tack down stitch is going to go around twice. I'm also going to be tacking another piece of fabric on it. So that little piece that missed at first, you don't really need to back it up. You can just let it finish, because the tack down stitch for this one also is going to secure it even more. We like to do our placement stitches or squaring stitch, and the very first stitch that ran as just a single ply, because it's just a marker to give you an indication, again, how much fabric you need and where to put it in the hoop. The tack down stitch will typically be a 2-ply stitch. That way it helps secure it even more. So step 2, we just did that tacking stitch for the shrinky. We're not going to trim, and then we're going to place our base fabric. So I just put my base fabric in. What am I covering? Well, the tack down stitch for that shrinky was directly on top of the squaring stitch. So I'm just going to use that as my placement for the actual fabric itself. I'm going to go ahead and get this tack down started and explain all that to you, because when I go to measure for this fabric, technically all of our quilt blocks, we like to maintain a 1/2-inch seam allowance outside of the outermost stitch, which again we refer to as the squaring stitch. It is just a placement stitch, but that very first stitch, the squaring stitch, again, is that indication for you to actually know when and where to trim. Because if I have applique inside the squaring stitch, or any fabric I'm tacking down, whether it's a folded fabric, a standard applique, etc., if it's not tacked down on top of that squaring stitch, I trim all of it. But any material that is tacked on top of that squaring stitch, I'm going to leave the excess amount in the seam allowance. Just a good habit to get into. However, with this particular type, we're going to be using it as an applique later on. The seam allowance doesn't matter as much, so you don't have to actually have it for this particular application. But if you're new, I would just get in the habit of doing it at first. All right. Well, as we can see here, I want to show you this on camera, because this is another thing that will actually be helpful later on. So let's get this focused here. Do it a little bit more like that. You see how when I place it, it's just because I'm at a little awkward angle, I didn't pull it up enough. It didn't tack it down across the top. Do I need to take the time to pull the whole thing out? Depends on how much of this I was planning on using. And I can get 4 flowers out of here easily, maybe 5 for this particular project. So what I'm going to do is ignore the fact that it missed that top area, and I'm going to actually tape that down. I love it when we have little mishaps here on camera, because it's not always going to be perfect. No matter how many years you've been doing this, there's always going to be little mistakes, but you learn how to either, one, ignore the mistakes when they really don't matter, or when you need to go back and fix it. So what I did was I just taped down that loose fabric, because I don't want my presser foot, when it's doing these running stitches, to get up underneath it. And I really don't need to utilize that little missing space for any of the heat and shrink applique going forward. So now that I've secured that little opening for my mistake, hopefully you've covered your squaring stitch all the way, but if you haven't, you see a little easy fix, so you don't have to spend the time to go back and actually pull all those stitches out and redo the whole thing. So we've just completed step 3. I can see I'm on step 4. It's the final step for this particular hooping. So I'm going to go back and reread step 3. We did the tacking stitch for the base fabric. It says do not trim. All right. We're going to move on to step 4, which it says match fabric. That's referring to the actual thread color itself. And because we just wanted to have a tonal stitch that was close to it, so it doesn't actually distract from the actual shrinkage that we'll get when we actually steam it with our iron later on. So I'm going to get this step running because it's a longer one, and then I'm going to kind of give you some other tips and tricks here, explain that quilting process a little bit more. All right, got step 4 running. So when I mentioned that, we're making a quilt block, I don't want you to get confused with my terminology with that. We're not using this in a quilt. It's just that we're creating this heat and shrink applique the same way we would a quilt block. So all of our quilt blocks, or all of our quilting collections rather, are referred to as mix and match quilting. That means that whenever we create a quilting collection, every single design, whether it's a single quilt block or a sashing or a corner block, etc., all of those are going to have the same steps in the very beginning. You're going to have your squaring stitch, the most important part of a quilt block, because that tells you, again, where and when not to trim or when to leave fabric in your seam allowance. And I'll explain why that's important later. But the next step, typically in a quilt block, is we like to put our batting in as we go. You see, traditional quilting, if you aren't a traditional quilter, you would have to hoop a whole piece of fabric. You wouldn't be hooping your batting because traditionally you would quilt that in later when you sew your whole top to the back of the quilt. But there's a lot of waste associated with that. So we like to just hoop our no-show mesh cutaway, which we love because it's lightweight and very tough. Really holds those seams together. And that squaring stitch tells me how much fabric I need. Cuts out all that waste. You can really maximize the yardage you get from your store, not have to run back and forth and then see endless scraps that keep building up over time. Once we do that squaring stitch, I know where to put traditionally my batting, but in this case, of course, we're using that shrink material. So we wouldn't be putting batting in this. But our quilt blocks, we actually quilt as we go. So that means when we make every single quilt block traditionally, not this application, we put in our batting after we do the squaring stitch, we tack it down, we'll trim that excess batting because we don't want it in our seam allowance. We'll then go ahead and put down our base fabric if there's only one piece, like the one we just did. Tack that down, and then it's going to go through any of the additional embroidery, applique steps, quilting stitches as well. So you will notice that it will do any stippling, free motion, quilting stitches, whatever it might be, as you go, and it's quilting the entire top in the hoop. So you don't have to quilt by check anymore and have somebody do it by hand or on a long arm, etc. It does it for you. All you're doing is straight stitching those blocks together at the end, and we have wonderful tutorials on our YouTube page that will walk you through how to sew those blocks together, how to back it, and even bind your quilts if you're new to that. But back to my original point was that with our quilting method, every single quilting design in our traditional quilt mix and match quilting collections comes in a minimum of 4 sizes, all the way up to 6 now because hoops just keep getting bigger. So what that does is it means I can take multiple different collections and I can stitch them out in the same hoop size, ones that I think will go together well, and then create my own unique quilt block comprised of a lot of different designs. Maybe I liked a farm quilt, but I had some other free motion farm quilt blocks from another collection, and I wanted to combine those. I mean, the possibilities are endless. What that also means is that our patterns that actually use our quilt blocks say that you have a tote bag that's really big and it's comprised of 16 different quilt blocks to make it up. Well, maybe I don't like the design that that actual pattern came with. I can just refer to the fact that it's a mix and match quilting system, choose any mix and match quilting collection we've ever done, stitch it out in the hoop size that it calls for, and then follow the pattern in the original tutorial for the tote bag to sew it all together. We also use our quilt blocks in things like pot holders, trivets, waist aprons, picnic baskets, table runners, you name it, placemats, etc. So the applications are endless, and it allows you to really customize your projects to how you see fit, as opposed to being stuck with the design that came with that pattern. So I hope I explained that well enough for you. If you have questions on that, just again, ask in the comments below, and our moderator will get right to you on that. So as it's finishing up this first quilt stitch for the star pattern, how about we give away some prizes? What we're going to do this time is you're going to type the word I give you here in a moment in the comments below. And then after the moderator sees enough of you have commented live here, this won't be available unless you're live with us today, then they will pick a winner. They will get, or give you rather, the link to email, which will be our customer experience at anita-goodesign.com. So if you're chosen as the winner, email that customer experience email, and they will send you a $20 gift card. So before I go on with this, how about we go ahead and do the first prize for a $20 digital gift card you can use on our website for any of our retail product. And that word to type in the comments below is Shrinky. Type Shrinky down below. Moderator will pick you as a winner here shortly. It's not my fault if you don't get picked. All right. So let me kind of get this a little in frame here. So with this, we went ahead and did our tonal stitches. It may be a little hard to see on the actual screen, but you notice that some of them ran up on the tape. Well, I'm not even going to use that part when I go to do this applique, and it's going to give you more perspective here in a moment when we get to this next hooping, that you'll be able to see that the actual flower itself really doesn't use that much of the entire quilt block. So what we do at this point is we're going to take this whole thing out of the hoop. We'd take it over to our iron, and we will not direct press with the iron. You get the iron close to it, have it on steam, and just blast it with some steam once you've taken it out and trimmed it. And you can follow along in the picture steps too. They'll go over that. And that's going to shrink all that fabric up and around all those stitches we just did, giving you this unique look. It's a lot of fun to play with. We enjoy using it because you know, when you design as many designs as we do here at Anita Goodesign, it's a lot of fun to be able to find new ways to give accents to the different focal points of the design elements. For instance, maybe we don't want to always use flat fabric. We want a little dimension, a little texture. And that's what this does. So you can either use the star pattern we just did or the circle pattern from the tutorial, or you can use a heat and shrink design from any of our other collections. All right, so now that we have finished our heat and shrink quilt block. We've taken it over to our iron after we took it out of the hoop and trimmed it up. We steamed it. We have it back over to our station now, ready to go, ready to use as our applique for the flower. We're going to go to our number step tutorials, and the file I'm going to be doing, which I'll pull up right now, is SAP3. So I'm going to be doing that flower with the leaf petals. So what we want to do here is go in, load that happy little guy, set him, get him ready for embroidery. And when you're going through these number steps, you may see numbers that are there. That's just referring to the actual exact colors we use. Sometimes we'll have the actual thread color number in there. Sometimes we will just give a general color. This is an abstract design. We don't know what color fabric you're going to use. So I recommend not getting stuck on the colors we're using here in class. Pick your fabrics first, the fabrics you want to use. Then go over to your thread rack or into the store and then pick threads that coordinate with it. Then you can go in your tutorial and make notes and write down beside the steps that you want to use as thread colors so that it's organized when you get to actually stitching it out. For this particular one, I'm just going to be stitching it on a base of felt with a tearaway stabilizer, but it's an applique. It doesn't matter what you're putting it on because you don't have to do it on felt like I'm doing. You could have a shirt hoops, rather, for all I know. You could be putting it on a quilt block, maybe. So just because it's applique and just because I'm doing it on this felt doesn't mean you need to. That's just how we're doing it in class for the demonstration. So I've got my next hooping ready to go. Got my tearaway medium weight stabilizer hooped. I've got my base fabric hooped. In your instance, you could be floating a t-shirt on top of a sticky back. You could be, again, have a quilt block that's hooped and ready to go, and you're just going to be stitching it right on there, whatever it is. All right. So now that we're getting into the second part, just want to remind you, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, click that notification bell to stay up to date with us, and keep commenting below, because the more engagement we have with you, the more you're going to learn, and the more people get to actually see this video on YouTube, because the YouTube algorithm behind the scenes will push it out to more people out there, and the more we'll get to learn from each other. So this, again, is SAP3, the file name for the one I'm doing in your tutorial. Again, let's follow with the number steps. You can always refer to the pictures later on if you need a little more of a visual context, but again, you have me here in the video. I've picked the hoop size I want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of look over the steps here first. I see that step one is the stems. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that previous thread I had out. And I've made my notes in my tutorial as to the thread colors I planned on using, just like we kind of talked about. When I mentioned picking your fabric first, there is a good reason for that. It is always easier to pick your fabric first, especially if you go into a fabric shop and there's aisles and aisles of fabric. It's always easier to pick your fabric first and then go to a small thread racking to coordinate those colors that are all right in front of you, as opposed to picking some thread and then spending all day walking up and down the aisles to find some fabric that goes with the thread. So that's why we like to pick our fabric first. So running step one, just the actual stems. I'm doing mine in a dark hunter green. Of course, always helps if I actually thread the needle first. All right. There we are. And I've got some other fun stuff to show you here once we get into some of these embroidery runs. There we go. All right, so while that is stitching out, we have a little flash sale for you. So this one is Anita's Express, came out in 2017, called Anita's Express Rag Quilt Mobile. So this is something that we did. It has that ragged edge look on it. I'm showing you up here first, and I'll give you a closer look in a moment. Back that out. And essentially what we did is we used different types of felts and linens as the backdrop. We put it all together and then clipped the edges to give it that ragged edge look. So you can see here, what that kind of looks like. And again, this is 50% off. You can get it right now at Anita's Express Rag Quilt Mobile by following the link pinned to the top of the comments below. We'll have that pinned there for you. So if you're watching this now and you want to get that, you can either just go online and type in the title of the collection I just mentioned, or you can just click that pinned link. Get that 50% off. Typically $30, $15 for you right now while the sales last. If you're watching this way down the road, sale might have expired, but there's always a sale going on. You'll always find something you want for a great deal, because that's what we do for you. All right, the next step I can see here is the small flower petals. We're on step 2. There's nothing to reread from step 1 because it was just embroidery. So I'm going to rethread that for the color I planned on using. Now, we also get a lot of questions about, what threads do we use when you see these numbers and everything else. Right now, I'm using Floriani thread colors. We use a wide variety of threads here in the studio. Everything from Robison Anton rayon threads to Mettler, Floriani, Madeira, you name it. So that's why also we like to just give the general colors. It really only matters, and starting step 2 now, it really only matters with thread color if you're trying to do something like a tile scene. When we give our tile scenes, our tutorials have every color of fabric we used as a swatch list, so you can match something close to it. And we give you the entire list of threads and what type they are, meaning if they're a Floriani thread that we're using, you'll have every list of threads and how much you need, so you can go out and get prepped for it because you want that tile scene to look like we made it. When it comes to abstract stuff like we're doing here today, that is totally up to you. And of course, with tile scenes, you're more than welcome to switch the colors, but if you're new to it, I know you're going to want to actually make sure that it looks the way we did when we made it. There are thread color conversion charts out there as well that will make it easy, because some machine brands will want you to use a very specific type of thread. And I'm not going to go into specifics on that to save confusion. But if you have machine brands that are very thread specific, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't have one of those machine brands. And speaking of machine brands, we make our software for everything. So it doesn't matter what type of machine you have. Even if you have, for some reason, an industrial machine at your house, these files will run on it. We convert our master file into every machine file type, and all machine file types are on every single design you get from us. All right. Blowing through the next step here. So something I want to discuss is we have only 4 main techniques that we do here at Anita Goodesign. Everything else is an application of those core 4 principal techniques. What we did with the quilt block was one of those. We are the first couple steps to every quilt block, even ignoring the fact that we use shrinky material in this, is that squaring stitch. We place whatever comes next. In this case, it was the shrinky material. Typically, it would be batting. We tack that down. Then we put our base fabric, we tack that down. That's it. That's all there is to do an actual quilt block. Everything else that happens after that actual quilt block are any of the other 3 things, which I'll explain in a moment as soon as I get this next step started. So step 2 is finished. Step 3 is just leaves. So I've got that color written down. We'll get that thread going. So running step 3, if you're following along with me right now. So the other 3 principal techniques you are doing at Anita Goodesign are very simple. First is embroidery. Embroidery, when it comes to machine digitized electronic embroidery, is literally what I just did right here. I'm just threading the machine and I'm following the embroidery steps and hitting go. You're not actually doing any of it because that's what you bought this machine for. So that's all there is to embroidery. And you'll be able to create all these wonderful designs you see just by knowing how to, 1, navigate your interface in the embroidery screen, as well as just changing your thread and threading it and hitting go. That's all there is to machine embroidery. The next principal technique is applique. which is what we're going to get to next. Now, when I say principal technique, applique is done the same way every single time, regardless of what it is used for. So if we're using applique for a accent like we're doing now, like a flower, it's just going to be a placement stitch that shows me where my fabric goes. I'll take my fabric, put it down right side up, tack it, and then trim the excess. Anything that happens after that is embroidery, the other principal technique. It doesn't matter if it's doing a satin stitch finish or if that whole piece of applique was being used to give us a really good color coverage so that we didn't see through the threads to our base fabric. And then that's called a hidden applique, and it does all the freehand embroidery on top. Or whether or not you're appliquing on a shirt, it doesn't matter. The first steps to applique are always the same, which makes it very easy because we're not reinventing the wheel every single time that we do something. Then the final of those four is folded fabric. Now, when I say folded fabric, what that means is we're mimicking traditional hand or paper piecing, but we're doing it with machine embroidery. So if you're a traditional quilter, then you know how, what skill level rather it takes to get those perfect folded edges, whether you're doing a flying geese pattern in a quilt block, whether you're doing a folded edge off a zipper if you're making a bag, doesn't matter. That folded edge, not a tack down edge with a raw edge that we have to cover with a stitch like applique, but that folded edge we call folded fabric. And again, that is mimicking traditional hand or paper piecing, but in the hoop, making it much easier because you can be a novice at this, and the digitizing will allow you to know exactly where to place your fabric for the folded fabric. And the way we do that is it'll do a placement stitch. I'll know to put my fabric right side down, just inside that placement stitch. It'll do a folding stitch. Then I fold my fabric along that folding stitch. Then it tacks it down. I didn't have to measure anything. I didn't have to make sure my fold line was perfectly straight or anything like that because it's machine embroidery. So that is always done the same way as well. Again, whether it is a folded fabric off of a zipper to give us a nice folded edge under our zipper on a bag, for instance, whether it's a flying geese pattern, whether it's, you name it, folded fabric borders around an individual quilt block. It's all done the same way. And my point of bringing up those four principal techniques is that if you are new and you've been to our website or you see all these different designs we have, don't feel overwhelmed because you can do 99% of everything we have just by learning and understanding those four principal techniques. We don't recreate on how we do them because we wouldn't be able to make as much as we do every single month if we reinvented the wheel every month. So everybody in this building knows those four principal techniques, and the different ways of manipulating that basically gives us all the different designs we see. So again, with that applique that we're about to do, when I do my placement stitch and I put my piece of fabric on top of that placement stitch, it tacks it, I trim it, that's applique. After that, whatever we're doing is just embroidery and you're following the number of steps, letting the machine do the work. There's not much else in that. And the reason I bring that up is because, after all the classes I've taught over the years, it's not that I hate it, but I feel bad when I come back to an event after a year and I'm just cleaning up some loose threads while I talk. And I say to somebody, I'm like, hey, I remember you from last year. How's it been going since the last class? And they're like, well, it was a lot. And, I learned how to make a zipper bag. I learned how to make a tea towel, whatever it might be. But I've been too scared to do it at home because there's so many different designs. I'm like, but you only learned 4 things in that class. You only learned applique, folded fabric, standard machine embroidery, and quilt block. Everything else that happens beyond that is an application. Learn those 4 things, and that's all you need to know, aside from, of course, sewing things together. That we don't teach here at Anita Goodesign typically in terms of how to actually run your machine when it comes to that, but your local dealers typically always have classes for that sort of thing. So now we're on step 4. Again, SAP3 is the file name I'm running, and that is going to be the leaf details. So maybe I want to accent those details a little bit, so I'm going to go back to that darker thread I used. Again, this is just my preference. You could keep running the same color if you wanted. Doesn't matter. It's all aesthetic at the end of the day. It's not going to cause something to fall apart if you use a color that's different than mine. You may think the colors I chose are horrid, and that is perfectly fine. Everybody's got their own taste, but the designs can all be ran the same way with whatever color you want. All right. Get that guy in there. So you can see here so far, we've just been doing machine embroidery on our base felt. Again, you can stitch this on whatever you like. If you need a little more motivation for what you would like to stitch it on, get this threaded properly, then you can refer to our website, our YouTube page. Please go through our YouTube page on the Anita Goodesign side of it, because we go back, I don't know, probably like 9 years worth of videos. We do videos on almost everything we do, so there's rarely going to be a type of project you won't be able to find. Maybe not the exact one you're doing, but our zipper bags, for instance, are typically done all the same way. So once you kind of find one you want to do, you can follow the general concept by just going to a zipper bag tutorial on our YouTube page. Same thing goes for quilting or applique or pot holders, etc. We have all those resources for free at your disposal that we know you're going to love. So another thing I'd like to show you, because it's June, is if you're a retail customer, you can go onto our actual website and you can buy individual collections at your leisure. Sometimes they're on special, sometimes you're paying full price for them, whatever, but all those are there for you. What I'm showing you is our all access. What this is a club membership that we have here at Anita Goodesign. And every month, you know, we may release several different collections that are just embroidery and applique that you can use on everything. And I'll hold this a little bit here. It might be slightly out of focus, but this is the back of the actual book itself. So this month in June, on our actual website, we released 3 different embroidery collections with a ton of different designs, embroidery and applique collections. We released 3 different quilting collections, all different varied designs. And we released 2 projects. And again, as a retail customer, you can go on the website and you can buy those individually. Our club membership bundles everything we release as a standard collection every single month. And it gives you a minimum of 80% off, which is huge. So if you find yourself going on to our website once or twice a month and buying a collection here, buying a collection there, you're probably already paying more than what you would pay as a club member. And the way it works is you sign up for a club membership, 12-month term, and every single month you'll receive a beautiful tutorial book, just like the one I have right here, with all the different collections that came out that month and all the tutorials fully printed in that book. Now, how that works is you'll receive the physical book every single month. If it's home delivery, that's where it'll go. If you have a dealer you'd like to pick it up from, it'll get delivered to that dealer. Home delivery is a little bit extra. And you'll go in, or you'll get your book at home. You'll notice that it has all the different tutorials for everything, all the number steps. It's got all the different picture steps in here. And a lot of other content in the beginning. We love education here, and you get additional content being a club member in your combined tutorial book, fully printed for you, all in the beginning. So anything from tips and tricks on notions, or interviews of different employees here, or customers, or sneak peeks of things that are going to be coming down the road. You get exclusive access to that, as well as bonus designs that are not released to the retail public. And of course, no matter what design you get individually online as a normal customer, you always get the tutorials. This just combines them all in a beautifully printed book. Now, we'll continue with this before I give you more details on what that is and what it means, because I want to show you one of the collections that came out this month in June as well. I'm on step 5. And if you aren't aware, if you're brand new to even your machine, and you're hearing me say these number steps, but you don't know where it's showing you the number step on your machine, then if you're a little hesitant to dive into a manual, because sometimes those manuals can be really thick, give your dealer a call, or go in and just have them show you around the interface again. because I'm seeing on my machine that I'm on step 5 of 8. I can see on SAP3, the file we're running, there's 8 steps. I know that I need to read step 5, because sometimes you may get up and walk away from the machine and forget where you're at. So step 5 is the placement stitch, then place flower applique, just like we discussed a moment ago. Except now we're going to be using that heat and shrink as the flower applique. So what I want to do is, since I'm going to be using the pink fabric, I'm going to switch back to my pink thread. I'm just coordinating it with the colors that I chose. Get this guy in there. All right. And now we're going to go ahead and run that placement stitch. So again, we're getting into applique here. I want to pause anything else I've been talking about, because this is one of those 4 things that we were just discussing, one of those 4 principal techniques. There we go. So applique always works like this. Doesn't matter what the applique is for. It's always a placement stitch. So we're going to go ahead and run step 5. Looking back at step 5, after I run this placement stitch, I'm going to place my flower applique. If you're at home and you don't have a video to follow along, and you're like, what do they mean by place my flower applique? How am I placing it? Is it right side up, right side down? What's going on here? That's where you go ahead and refer back to those picture steps to actually see. Because in the picture step here, I can see that it's showing me to go ahead and do the embroidery and everything. And then it's going to show me how to applique. Run that placement stitch, showing me that I'm placing our heat and shrink applique that we're using for this one, right side up. If you don't want to use this, but you want to do that flower, you can use any applique you like. Then we're going to tack it down, and then we're going to trim the excess and let the embroidery do the rest. All right, I've got my placement stitch. Now I know exactly where to put this. Get some of these excess threads trimmed away there. Dun, 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 dun. Just make it look nice and pretty. Clean it up before I tack down this other fabric. Pull this out a little bit. Now, if I want to utilize this fabric for multiple different designs, I don't want to just take it right out of the center, unless there was a very specific pattern in the shrinkage that you wanted to use. I'm just going to use enough of a corner to get by. So I'm going to take that, corner it, and because this has a loft to it from shrinking up, that means the presser foot that's going down could have a tendency to move it as we stitch. So it's important to know your machine, because they are all slightly different, but they all, basically for standard home machines, not multi-needles, will have the presser foot that rides low on it. So I like to just tape it down and secure it so that it doesn't move it while it's stitching, making you at that point having to take it out and actually redo it over again. All right, make sure I've got all those placement stitches covered. Now I'm going to refer back to those number steps in the tutorial. And we can see that for SAP3, my machine says I'm on step 6 of 8. I'm going to go back and look at 5 again. I did place the flower applique. I'm cornering it to only use a little bit of the entire heat and shrink quilt block. And now step 6 that we're on, I'm going to do the tacking stitch, then trim the flower applique, which we'll go over in just a moment. So while it's doing that tacking stitch, again with back to that all access. With our all access, again, if you wanted to take advantage of the extreme discounts you get by being a club member, again, it is only a 12-month subscription. And that 12-month subscription will give you our all access books every month with every single collection we've created as a retail product that month, all in one, again, at a minimum of 80% off. And there's a couple ways to do it. You can sign up for all access on our website. If you go through our website and go to our All Access Club membership, you can see that there's 3 different options. There is all 12-month subscriptions. First option is going to be $1,400 for an entire year. That breaks down to roughly about $116 a month if you want to look at it that way, which means if you're going online and you're spending or buying 2 different designs a month, that could be about 140 bucks if they're not on sale or anything like that. You've already spent more, and you're not even getting everything. So take advantage of it. Let me trim this up, and we'll tell you more about that. So it's a little hard to see here. You'll see a little bit of the indentation, but that is our tacking stitch going around for the flower. Now, when we cut this, let me see where I can get this in frame for you a bit. I don't want to cut all the way through the scrap. I'm going to start from the side that's closest to it and get in there and start trimming. Now, when you're wondering how close to trim, this is where you would want to go back to your picture steps, because when you're like, okay, trim it, how close do I really need to be to that actual tack down stitch? Sometimes it really depends on how you're going to finish it up or what it's being used for. I just recommend, unless you're doing a raw edge finish to an applique or a ragged edge, something like this, I would trim it as close as you can get to those tack down stitches. I personally like using curved tip applique scissors, whether you're going to use snips or the double curve, which this second curve keeps my hand off the hoop so I'm not punching it while I trim, because it allows you to get into intricate cuts, whereas a straight tip will actually keep punching through the tack down stitches. So this helps you deflect off of them. And I'll show you what this looks like once I'm done trimming it, because you want to aim for about no more than a 1/16 inch or 1/8 inch of fabric sticking out past that tack down stitch. Now the Shrinky Applique is going to be feel a little different to trim than just a flat normal piece of 60/40 cotton, say for instance. But you still want to apply that same principle of let's get as close as we can, because this finish stitch around the edge for this applique is going to be a satin stitch finish. And if I have too much of that fabric sticking out past the tack down stitch, it's just going to not look great, because that excess fabric or any threads are going to be peeking through that satin stitch, giving you the look you may not want. So you can see here I've trimmed, there's no more than about a 1/16 inch of that fabric sticking out past that tack down stitch all the way around, and you can see how that shrinky fabric gives it a really cool texture there. So let's dive back into our number steps, see where we're at. All right. So now I know on my machine I'm on step 7. It's telling me I'm going to do the flower satin stitch. So we're going to go ahead and switch up our color. Let's see, we're still going to use 127. So I'll re-thread that again. I wrote down my colors, but I forgot which ones they applied to. All right, so this is basically going to finish the outside of the applique. And again, that's all there is to applique, what we just did. We did our placement stitch, fabric right side up. On top of that, completely covering the placement stitch. We tacked it, we trimmed it. That's it, that's applique. Everything else is just embroidery, no matter what you're doing, no matter what the design looks like. So I want you to think about that, because once you do it a couple times, you'll go on our website and you'll start saying, oh, I already know how to do that. It's just folded fabric, applique, and embroidery, or just applique and embroidery for this one. Or if it's a quilt block, you may be using all 4 techniques and then applications of them, but it's all just embroidery at that point. So we'll go ahead and start this satin stitch finish, and then I'll show you what it looks like once it's completed. All right, get that in there one more time. There we go. Okay, so, and same thing even with all access, just looking on the back of this, I can look at the different collections that came out this month, like Seasonal House Trios. That's just applique and embroidery. Charming Cottages, a little bit applique and embroidery. Regal Blackwork Birds, all embroidery. You see how it's just using those same themes over and over. They look very different, and that can look intimidating, but you're not doing anything different. Quilting, same thing. Some of them have folded fabric, some don't, but they're all just using those 4 techniques. With the projects, this is where it gets fun, because we actually, like I mentioned earlier, like to use quilt blocks in our projects as the foundation for not all, but a lot of patterns. So for this one, the Moody Plant Pals, that came out this month in June, this is actually made of 2 quilt blocks, and then we did a circle quilt block as well. So all of these, regardless of the shape, before we sew them together, are going to be that quilt block squaring stitch, which may sound confusing because the circle still does have a squaring stitch. That just lets us know when we need to leave fabric in the seam allowance, which basically means if we don't have any fabric in our seam allowance, it can pull right out of that tack down stitch. We want that extra fabric so that as things actually pull on the seams, there's a little room for the fabric to stretch and give. So we basically stitch out these elements. We create each quilt block one at a time, and then there's the actual full picture tutorial showing you how to sew it all together. So you can see here, there's the different bear, and they are called moody because they all have different expressions, which makes them a lot of fun. Because maybe you have a plant that's very moody when it gets too much water. Sometimes it's happy, depending on which way you turn it. All different animals, all different expressions, faces, etc. But it goes through in the back here, and I'll just skip to some of those picture steps just to give you an idea, is when constructing your plant pal, this is where it's going to walk you through all those different steps. And you'll be able to see more if you decided to get this as an individual collection, or maybe you're like, man, I want to sign up for All Access right now. So again, to those different ways of signing up for All Access, that $1,400 for a 12-month subscription of everything we release, which is over $8,000 yearly value, comes with a $1,400 gift card. So you give us $1,400 for a year subscription of all brand new design collections, of all the retail products we make in that year, and we automatically give you $1,400 back immediately so that you can go on our website and back build your library with any collections you want. So if you were to sign up today, you may start in July, but you can go back with that gift card and pick the different projects you want. All right, we'll go to this next step. And of course, there are some other ways to sign up for All Access as well that I'll touch on. So we're on the final step here. We're doing the flower center and details. I'm going to use a yellow thread this time. All right, so we're running the final step here. It's just embroidery, changing your thread. But those other ways of signing up for All Access is maybe you don't need that gift card, because I know there's some of you, and please let us know in the chat below. Maybe some of you have actually been doing this so long you have everything. And in fact, on that note, let's give away a prize. If you have everything, or if you just want to be eligible for this next $20 gift card, in the comments below, type everything. Our moderator will pick a winner here in just a moment. For the live stitch out, you won't be able to get this particular prize later on, which is why you need to make sure you like, subscribe, and click that notification bell to be notified so you can be here when we're live so that you can be eligible for these prizes. All right, type everything below. But the $9.99 club essentially doesn't come with a gift card. So that gives you $999 for a 12-month subscription. You still get the printed book, you get everything we release every single month with no gift card, because maybe you don't know of anything else you could possibly purchase with it. Except you could always give it for a friend for Christmas. And the last way is maybe you don't need the physical book, or maybe you love just looking at everything on your tablet or laptop or whatever it may be, whether it's individual number steps, tutorials, etc. Well, we have our digital option. And we pass the savings of not having to print off these books, because you know how expensive printing is these days, to you, and a year's worth of our digital only, meaning again, no physical printed tutorial. You just get the digital PDF of this entire thing, fully interactive, for only $499 for a whole year. Breaks down to under $50 a month. So if you're out there and you're buying one collection at a time a month, you're spending too much. Why not get everything? Why not have a library that gives you all the things you could possibly want to do at your leisure? Doesn't mean you're going to do them all. It means you have a library to do anything you want, whenever you want. And if you do sign up for a club and you're in there and you're checking out, in the order notes, type in my name, type in Bryan. That way I can get a high five when I walk back downstairs. All right, so finishing up that final step here. Got a few more stitches. Just to recap on what we've done here in Watch and Stitch today is we use that heat and shrink material we went over in the beginning. So if you tuned in late because you're watching this live, just wait for this live stream to end. You'll be able to rewatch the entire thing from the beginning as many times as you want. That heat and shrink material allows us to create a quilt block with free motion. We steam it with our iron, shrinks up, and then we've used that in our applique to give us a unique look. And all we've done here today is we did 3 of those 4 principal techniques I mentioned. We did the quilt block technique first. We did the applique and embroidery technique. That's it. That's all we did. So learning these 3 techniques, I now know how to actually make the quilt blocks for this collection. This is the same technique as what we just did. It's just that at the end, we're sewing it together, which is also there in the tutorial for you. And it's rare that we're really doing anything other than a straight stitch. Of course, straight would be a circle around here. So all very simple, especially if you're new. There are plenty of things just to do that are only embroidery. If that's how you want to get your feet wet, you can find anything in your house you want to embroider on, as I'm sure you will. All right. Now that I've finished running that final step, get a few of these threads cleaned up real quick so you can kind of see it better and show you what it looks like. All right. And if you're watching this later on, or if you have watched this before, like later on, as in not right now while we're live, but if you come back to this video and you've stitched this out, let us know what you thought, excuse me, in the comments below as well. So this is the finished piece. And I know maybe a little hard to see, but to give it at that angle again, we've got that full heat and shrink applique as the flower. And again, this can go on anything you want. Maybe I wanted to stitch it on my shirt, not this felt. Maybe I want to put it on a bag, whatever it might be. That's what that is there for you to do. Another fun way of using an applique. And again, you can go and get the entire month of June watch and stitch on our website just by clicking the link below for only $30, and you'll be able to do everything right along with us this month. Or if you're watching this month down the road, doesn't matter. All those videos are always up there. Be sure to go to our website, buy the previous months for ones you want to do. And remember about that flash sale. So if you are watching this live today, or maybe the next day or two, it is the Anita's Express Rag Quilt Mobile. Came out in 2017. 50% off, only $15 today is typically $30. And of course, don't forget to take advantage of that club membership. Thank you for tuning in today to Watch and Stitch. Come back and watch this again. Keep commenting below and let us know how you did with your project. Thank you for tuning in today. We'll see you at the next one.